Alright guys, so we are going to finish up the notes. We had about 10 slides to go. I know you guys had a lot of small stories and extra side notes and conversations yesterday that were, for the most part, beneficial, but it kind of put us off track a little bit. So you're going to finish these notes first, and then after that you're going to have a few videos you're going to watch, and then you're going to be working on a small worksheet on the ozone layer, and that's why the videos are going to be targeted towards the ozone layer as well. They're just a couple of small short clips. Alright, so the last portion of your notes, hopefully you are on the page that you need to be, and hopefully I've been able to waste enough time so that way those of you who are not totally paying attention or not totally with it just yet, since it's second block already, then you're able to actually get to the right page and be ready to go. Alright, so environmental solutions is the last topic for today, and so what we're going to be looking at is, first of all, we're going to state goals of conservation and restoration biology, describe examples of efforts to protect species and their habitats. So that's going to be some of the laws and acts that have been in place over the years to protect some of those species that were facing extinction or facing endangerment, and summarize international strategies for protecting entire ecosystems, discuss the roles of government and laws in addressing environmental problems, so like I was mentioning how the government's going to bring in all these laws, and lastly list several things that individuals can do to help solve environmental problems, so things that you guys can do. Alright, so environmental solutions. Our plan is a delicate balance of living and non-living components. We talked about that in the first unit, that we have a lot of biotic and abiotic factors, and paying attention to the fact of there's an interconnection between each of these factors, and if you take one of them away, it's going to affect everything. So recognizing that delicate balance is really important. When you're looking at the rest of this, it says environmental problems connect across national boundaries. So if you were to kind of think of the world a while back when there was no civilization, then you'd realize that there was no boundaries or grid lines, but the whole problem continues across our northern boundary into Canada, our southern boundary into Mexico, and same thing with all the other countries as well. Alright, here's where you're missing some of your terms. So you can see they are in the orangish color. So when we're looking at conservation and restoration in a field called conservation biology, naturally the term conservation means that you're trying to protect or conserve or save, and so scientists seek to identify, protect, and manage natural areas that retain much biodiversity. Alright. Let's see if I have okay. And the last one, in restoration biology, scientists deal with extreme cases of ecosystem damage and attempt to restore natural habitats and increase biodiversity in damaged areas. So if there are damaged areas, then restoration biology, those scientists are actually going to go in and create maybe some sort of protected area that keeps poachers out, and so help to replenish and restore that area, not necessarily just for the animals, but maybe it's for the plants. So when we have deforestation, I mentioned yesterday about rainforests and how poor the soil is, and so therefore whenever we actually go through and we cut down all the trees, then all the nutrients that are in the soil that were going to the trees, which was very small amount, is probably not going to be enough to sustain a whole amount of life, especially the life that was living underneath the trees, because that life maybe required a little bit more shade, and so then the bright sunlight's just going to burn and wither it out. So it makes it more of a barren wasteland because the ecosystem has been completely eradicated or destroyed. Alright. When we're looking at species and habitats, we're saying that species and their habitats are interconnected, which we have realized to this point. So we know that species are going to be all the organisms that are living in an area. It doesn't have to be animals. It could also be the plants. And then the habitat is going to be the place where they live. So therefore, if you had, I also mentioned yesterday, if you had the keystone species of sea otters in a kelp bed, then if you were to disrupt that particular habitat and remove the kelp, or maybe change the salinity of the soil, not of the soil, of the water, then that's going to cause the kelp bed to probably die because it's not used to the change in the salinity. And so if that was the case, then it might also cause the rest of the ecosystem there in that habitat to be destroyed. It says the health of one directly influences the health of the other, like I was mentioning. And then you have these things called bioindicators. Bioindicators are especially sensitive to ecological change, act as an early warning signal for environmental problems. So in the picture there you have mayflies in Pennsylvania. And so mayflies themselves are actually very old. Mayflies indicate freshwater health because their clutch size is directly related to the biotic and abiotic factors. So if they are very, very small, that would indicate that the freshwater health is probably not so great, or it's not to the standard that would be beneficial for life to exist. When the mayflies are a little bit larger, meaning that you can see this one's pretty large across the palm, not the palm, but the fingers of this person's hand, then you can see that the fresh water in this area is probably pretty substantial. In providing ecosystems, or sorry, protecting ecosystems, we mentioned that you might have some issues with ecosystems, but in protecting them, that's really important, and that's part of what those in the restoration biology and conservation biology would be trying to do. So ecosystem protection is important for our short-term and long-term survival. We've been mentioning this for the last couple days here, that it's really important to kind of stay on task with maintaining our ecosystems, because if the ecosystems are not maintained, then we're going to see that there's a depletion in the food sources for us and a number of other factors too. One current strategy is to protect ecosystems called harboring the most biodiversity. So a lot of times if we're able to like create zoos or restricted areas that help to maintain the wildlife in the area, that's going to be beneficial, and it's going to help to keep out those individuals that may harm or affect that particular hotspot. So there are currently 25 biodiversity hotspots. They are ranging around the planet, and so what you'll see in the next picture, I have a map of all these, and you have it in your notes there as well. Yours is in black and white, so you might want to fill in or shade in those with highlighter. So if somebody else has a highlighter, you can borrow it perhaps if they're kind enough to let you do that. Regions that contain a significant amount of biodiversity but take up only 2% of the globe. So if I look at this picture, I can see that there are certain hotspots in particular areas. Some of them you'd be like, yeah, that makes sense exactly where they are, and other ones you'd be concerned, or not concerned, but surprised as to why there's a hotspot there. So there is a hotspot over in California for us, and then all in Central America down into South America. So you can see all along this border here where you have like the Andes Mountains through Peru and Cuba and Chile, not Cuba, Peru and Chile. And as you're kind of traveling down here, you can see that there is a substantial, you can see like the different levels of the hotspots. So there's a substantial amount in these areas because of the mountainous region, but then also there's going to be a lot of rain in this area. Same thing with the Amazon rainforest right here. So that's typically the rainforest most of you would hear about, so you'd be more familiar with that. You have a lot of warmer climates right along the Mediterranean Sea here, so you can see all bordering here is going to be a hotspot of biodiversity. Madagascar, for those of you who have watched the movie, you would recognize in the movie that it seems like it's very lush and there are a lot of organisms, and so that is true. Down at the bottom of the Cape of Africa here, you'd recognize there's hotspots all along the edges. So you notice like a lot of the hotspots typically will be along the edges of the ocean because there's plenty of water, and the water then when it evaporates goes through the water cycle, it's going to downpour a ton of rain. If you look over here, you're going to see in all of southern China, you're going to have a lot of that into southeastern Asia and all those areas, and then it goes into Polynesia all the way over onto the other side of the map here. New Zealand, naturally, and the bottom of Australia. You would think that it is close to Antarctica, so it wouldn't have a ton of resources, but then you'll also notice that majority of Australia, if you were looking at your biomes, is very dry and arid, and it's more desert-like or grassland-like. So there's not a lot of biodiversity in the middle of the continent, or country if you want to call it either one. But at the bottom, you see that it actually has a substantial amount of biodiversity. So these are your biodiversity hotspots. These are what we would actually want to try and preserve as much as possible, because this is where there might be medicines in certain insects or plants that we haven't discovered yet. So that's actually really beneficial for us to have all this biodiversity, and without it, then we're going to be depleted of resources that we possibly could have attained. Okay, I mentioned the other day about the ozone layer, and so this is going to lead into what you guys are going to be doing a little bit later today, talking about chlorofluorocarbons, or in other words CFCs. They were basically started to be produced more in the 70s and 80s. I think it's a little bit before as well. And by 1987 is when we had a law put in place to ban the use of chlorofluorocarbons, because what they were doing is we were recognizing that they had an effect on the ozone layer, thinning it and causing a hole. And what the detrimental part of having a hole in the ozone layer does is the ozone layer helps to block out our UV radiation from the sun. So without it, then it allows all that UV radiation to come through, and we already know that UV radiation can be bad because it can cause cancer, like skin cancer. So without the ozone layer, that would be detrimental to human beings and also to other organisms and animals as well that aren't used to that extra UV radiation. Right now, that hole was typically towards the bottom of, actually I can show you on the map, so let's go back to the map for a second. So the ozone layer basically was like towards the bottom of South America here, and then spanning across, like if you're ever looking at it, you can see that Antarctica is the major continent that you're going to see in those pictures and images of that ozone layer or ozone hole. So as you're looking, you might see parts or tips of South America, but typically it's more just across Antarctica, which is bad because then Antarctica is getting all that extra radiation, which could cause changes in the ice. But if you're looking at it in terms of like a good respect, it's not over top of a very inhabited area, so that's beneficial. But you got to pay attention to the fact that penguins are down there too, so I mean, that'd be bad. All right, so chlorofluorocarbons, they were used in air conditioners, aerosol sprays, plastic foam products, and so a lot of like commercial uses were basically bringing this into play, and so whenever they put the ban on it, that hurt a lot of companies, and they had to find other ways and other means of actually utilizing that, because chlorofluorocarbons are used in like earlier freon settings, so like freon for like your refrigerator to keep everything cool, that used these chlorofluorocarbons. All right, so by 1995, governments around the world agreed to stop using them. Basically, 1987 was when it was put in place. By 95, they were all taken out. So the damage may take 50 to 100 years. In the videos you're going to be watching, one says by 2040, we might actually have no hole in the ozone layer, and the other one says by 2050. So it's all speculation at this point because it just depends on a lot of different factors. Volcanoes also affected as well. All right. So here's what happens in terms of your ozone layer. So one, CFCs are emitted and reach the ozone layer. So in the 80s, a lot of girls would use hairspray, for example. And so the hairspray itself had CFCs. So as they are spraying their hair, then those CFCs get into the atmosphere down in the troposphere. They'll actually escape and reach into the stratosphere, which is where we would find our ozone layer. And then what happens is these CFCs actually will react with the ozone. They knock off one of the oxygen molecules, which attaches to a chlorine. And so then that becomes let's see, I can't think of the name for it. It slipped my mind. So you have one chlorine and one oxygen atom that are going to combine here, you can kind of see, and then the oxygen molecule by itself, but I mean that's not beneficial because that breaks down the ozone layer then. Now what happens over time is the ozone layer can actually reform, so you'll see that some of the oxygen molecules will split due to maybe lightning or some other energy that is emitted or kind of breaks them apart, and in doing so then you have errant oxygen molecules by themselves, which are then going to reattach with or oxygen atoms by themselves, which reattach with oxygen molecules to make then that O3. So you have like one separate oxygen atom that then will combine with a molecule to make O3 as opposed to O2. But with the CFCs and everything in the area, that kind of makes it more difficult because they're still going to cause this breakdown a little bit. And it takes a long time. CFCs have a long life, and they're going to be like sticking around for a while, so until they're actually completely taken out of the area, it's going to make it difficult for the ozone layer to repair itself a little bit faster. So the ozone layer then breaks down, creates a hole, and then the sunlight comes in. Sunlight comes in, and then you can see that the sunbeams are going to be able to get through, so then we have harmful UV rays that get through the ozone layer. So that's basically what's happening. Alright, so like I was mentioning, there was an act or a law that took place. It's called the Montreal Protocol of 1987. So notice it's in Montreal, so it's in Canada. It's not even a U.S. Kind of agreement, but it was a global agreement, meaning that everybody came together in Montreal to discuss the issue with the ozone layer depletion, and they came up with a solution to ban CFCs worldwide. And so, like the previous slide said, it didn't take into effect until about 1995. So many developing countries had little money but large amounts of biodiverse habitats. They have developed a debt for nature swap where richer countries or private organizations pay for some debts of developing nations, provided that they take steps to ensure preservation. So the bottom here mentions that some countries that are developing, so like third world countries, don't have the money to be able to put into paying for debts and everything that they owe because they're poor countries. But they have these rich biodiverse areas, and so what the richer countries will do is take steps to make sure that there's preservation. So they'll put in those like nature preserves to keep out poachers, for example, for like rhinoceroses, just to make sure that they are not drawn to extinction, as they already are kind of heading that way. All right. Last thing, private efforts and cooperation. We have like two more slides here. And so one of these is called ecotourism, just as it sounds. It is tourism, meaning a bunch of individuals, human population coming into an area to view it, to see it, to visit it. But it's ecological, meaning they are coming in to see the land, the habitat, the animals, all of that. So that'd be like your African safaris. That'd be like walking into a rainforest and getting like a tour through the rainforest to see like gorillas or something of that sort. So ecotourism says tourism that supports conservation and benefits local people and ecosystems, also attempts to offset damage from tourism. So these are individuals that are going to be coming in and helping to preserve, helping to make sure that the animals are safe and protected whenever people come in and do like these like big game hunting in Africa, like Central Africa, and take out a lot of the animals that we would like to see at zoos, which, I mean, is also something that people would argue with, is that good or bad? At the bottom then there are two prominent pieces. First one is based on government. So government comes up with the Endangered Species Act. Endangered Species Act basically takes into account those individuals or those organisms that are endangered and tries to protect them, putting them to preservations or reserves, putting them into zoos in captivity, but then also enabling them to possibly breed and produce, so that way we can keep that society of organisms going. The second one, you might have, in this area at least, in western Pennsylvania, there is a path that travels, I forget exactly from where, but it goes through North Park in Hampton area, if you've ever been there, like Hampton, McCandless area. And it goes and travels about 35 miles, and it's called the Rachel Carson Trail. Usually it's, if you've ever been on it, it is emblazed with yellow dots, or we'll say like gold blazes. But it's a path going through nature, and so therefore those individuals who are excited about it can actually travel through. Rachel Carson was a huge environmentalist, wrote a lot of books. This one specifically, Silent Spring, had a really big impact, and so you can see it says individuals and media also play an important role in raising awareness. So she was constantly trying to raise awareness for ecological protection and preservation of all the organisms, at least especially in western Pennsylvania here. So that name might be familiar to some of you guys. All right, and so your role in the environment, you can be an urban ecologist by learning about biodiversity in our area, by identifying and conserving the plants and animals that are native to our area. We can create a more sustainable environment. So if you were able to, you should be able to name 5 plants native to our area and 5 animals native to just western Pennsylvania. And that would be one thing that you could do to make people aware as to what is here. Number 2, learn what crops and livestock are raised here. Shop locally. So if you have, during summer is kind of ending now, but if you had farmers markets in your area, that would be a huge thing, is to go to farmers markets and to purchase your produce there. And typically it's a lot cheaper anyways, because it's going straight to the farmers and they don't have to hike up their prices due to putting it into grocery stores. So it's always beneficial to shop locally and to shop directly from those who are actually, living off of the land. And the last thing, just reduce, reuse, recycle. So make sure that you're able to recycle as much as you can at home. If you don't have recycling at home, there are always a lot of recycling centers. You can look them up and you can take your recycling to those places. So just keep them in bins and then take it from time to time. And that way all of that stuff doesn't end up in a landfill, as we were mentioning yesterday, and should hopefully enable everybody to keep the planet healthy and safe for all of our species. All right. So last thing, no one can predict our environment's future, but it's clear that individuals can make a difference in its fate, as as was mentioned with like Rachel Carson and a couple other people that were in the slides. Okay. So this is something that you guys could do in your area. You could create gardens and you could grow your own produce, and that would be beneficial for you. And that is it. So what we're going to be doing now is we are going to be watching some videos. Those videos are going to be, I didn't do just one, but I did a few videos. So we're going to watch a brief video on ozone layer danger from NASA, complete the handout on ozone, and that will be the extent of what you guys are going to be doing today. If you get that handout completed, you'll turn it into your substitute, and your substitute will collect it in a folder that is going to be due by the end of today. So those of you who like to chat it up and goof off, hopefully that doesn't happen today. If for some reason you don't complete it today, I will probably have a note from the teacher saying who did or who didn't turn it in. Plus I'll also have the folder full of all of your fun, exciting assignments. Okay, if you wanted to, if you haven't already done so, check in your folders. You'll notice that your games, your board games, have been graded. Your scores are in there, so you can check that out. And lastly, your test scores, check in PowerSchool. Not sure if I'll get it done for you, but if it is, then those will also be posted in PowerSchool for you. And then I have a few individuals who still have yet to take their test. Okay? So I will see you guys tomorrow. If you need me, technically I still am here at school. I'm just in the cafe on the second floor doing all the computer stuff. So have a good day, and we'll see you tomorrow.